I had just stepped into my tiny apartment in New York, utterly exhausted after another long, dragging day at the office. I'm 38 years old now, Noah Henderson, living alone in this cramped little nest, where the city's noise seems to be blocked outside the window. Every day is the same. I come home, rip off my wrinkled shirt, toss it onto the sofa, then shuffle into the kitchen to prepare a simple meal. Tonight it was pasta with canned tomato sauce and a few slices of cheap cheese. Nothing fancy, but enough to fill my starving stomach. I turned on the electric stove and the smell of food began to spread through the quiet air. This is my life now. Repetitive, with no friends, no phone calls, just me and the swirling thoughts in my head. It's been 4 years since everything collapsed. 4 years of living like a shadow, quietly isolating myself from the world, staying away from people and from the painful memories I never want to revisit. I thought I had grown used to this solitude, used to the silent apartment, used to no one coming by, no one knocking on the door. Until that moment. A sudden knock echoed through the room, tearing apart the familiar silence like a cold blade. My heart pounded hard and fast, as if it somehow sensed that the past had just found its way back. It had been a very long time since anyone came here. Maybe a neighbor needing help. Or a late delivery person. I stopped what I was doing, turned off the stove, and walked to the door with a mix of surprise and wariness. My hand gripped the deadbolt tightly. I took a deep breath before opening it. All sorts of thoughts flashed through my mind. This probably wasn't good news. I pulled the door open and the world seemed to freeze. Standing in front of me was Claire, my ex-wife, Claire Henderson. She was still as beautiful as ever, with her golden blonde hair neatly tied up, a fitted black dress hugging her body and high heels gleaming under the hallway light. But her eyes, those eyes were arrogant and cold, looking at me like a stranger, someone unworthy of her attention. I stood there stunned, my mouth dry, unable to utter a word. 4 years after the divorce, not a single call, not a single message checking in. We had cut all ties, or at least I thought we had. She stood there, no smile, no greeting, just staring at me as if I were an obstacle in her path. I remained still, waiting for something bad, because the way things ended between us had been too cruel, too painful for this to be a friendly visit. Claire didn't step inside. She didn't even bother pretending to be polite. She simply thrust a wedding invitation toward me, the motion quick and sharp, as if tossing away a piece of trash. The contempt was clear on her face, a half smirk, eyes scanning over me as though I were an outsider, someone who only deserved to be informed, not invited to participate. I took the card, my hand trembling slightly, and opened it. The elegant embossed letters hit me like a blow. Claire Henderson and Paul Henderson cordially invite you to attend the wedding of Paul Henderson, my own father. The news struck like an icy cut straight through my heart. My ex-wife marrying my father. I froze in that moment, my mind numb, unable to think, unable to breathe. Claire looked at me, then immediately turned and walked away, leaving behind an unrestrained, mocking laugh. That laugh echoed down the hallway, sharp as a knife, making me want to scream, but my throat choked. The door closed behind me with a final click of the lock, sounding like a verdict. I stood alone in the kitchen, still clutching the invitation, as buried memories surged up all at once, heavy and sharp like shards of broken glass. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air, trying to regain composure. But I couldn't. They flooded back. The images, the words, the pain I had tried so hard to bury over the past 4 years. I collapsed into a chair, the invitation falling onto the table, and let the memories drag me back into the past. I remember our marriage with Claire clearly. We met in college, fell madly in love, and got married while we were both young and full of dreams. The early years seemed perfect. We had a small house in the suburbs of New York, evenings cuddling while watching movies, weekend getaways. I worked at a small legal firm handling civil cases, decent pay, enough to live on but nothing extravagant. Claire worked in finance, highly ambitious, always dreaming of a luxurious life. At first, everything was peaceful, but gradually it became a false peace. Signs of betrayal grew clearer. The distance in our conversations, mysterious late-night meetings she explained away as work, repeated lies. "I have a meeting tonight, so I'll be home late," she'd say, but I could smell unfamiliar perfume on her clothes. "I'm out with colleagues." Yet her phone buzzed constantly with hidden messages. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a rough patch. But then the moment of truth became a wound that never healed. It was a rainy evening. I came home earlier than planned and saw my father's car parked in front of the house. Paul Henderson, my father, a successful, powerful businessman with his own company and a social status I could never reach. I walked in, and there they were. Claire and him on the sofa, embracing as if no one else existed. Claire's lover was none other than my own father. The emotional pain turned into the complete collapse of our family. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, body shaking. "Why him?" I whispered, but they just looked at me calmly, as if I were the intruder. After that, arguments between Claire and me became constant. She belittled my legal work, calling it insignificant, lacking prestige and income to support her growing ambitions. "You're just a mediocre lawyer, Noah," she said, voice dripping with contempt. "That job brings no fame and it can't give me the life I want. You never truly understood what I needed." I tried to defend myself, tried to save the marriage, but it was useless. During those fights, Claire began comparing me to Paul. "Your father is different," she'd say, praising his success, power, and social standing. "He knows how to build an empire, how to command respect." Those words cut deep into my self-esteem. Her twisted admiration for my father, the man who should have been an insurmountable moral barrier, became a cruel weapon. I felt small, a failure, a loser in my own home. The divorce was swift. Claire left me without hesitation, packed her things, and moved in with Paul. She didn't even bother fighting over assets, probably because my father had promised her far greater things. As for me, I disappeared from all old relationships. I cut ties with friends and relatives, lived in seclusion without socializing. New York is huge, but to me it became narrow, filled with ghosts from the past. I moved into this apartment, buried myself in work, trying to forget. But how could I forget? Every night I lay awake, thinking about that betrayal, about how the family shattered because of greed and desire. Back in the present, I gripped the invitation tightly. The pain was no longer there. It had hardened over the 4 years. What was rising now was a cold, clear awareness. I looked at the card. The wedding date was clearly printed, only a few weeks away. Did they think they could treat me like an afterthought, send a notification, and then turn away laughing? I will show up at that wedding, not to offer congratulations, not to cause a scene, but to close this chapter in my own way. I set the invitation down on the table, turned off the stove light, and lay down on the bed. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from a familiar thrill. This game isn't over yet, and this time, I'm the one who decides the ending. But sleep did not come easily. I lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the pitch-black ceiling, thoughts swirling in my head like an unrelenting storm. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy head, as if I had spent the entire night battling invisible ghosts. I dragged myself out of bed, brewed a strong black coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table. Breakfast was simple: toasted bread with butter and a few boiled eggs. I ate alone in the empty kitchen, but my mind was completely elsewhere. Every movement felt heavy and mechanical, fork in hand, bringing it to my mouth, chewing and swallowing without tasting anything. My eyes stared into empty space, but inside my head, old images flooded back, pulling me deep into the abyss of memory. The shock of that affair didn't just take away my marriage, it also took away my gentle mother, the only spiritual pillar left in my family. My mother, Eleanor Henderson, was a strong yet tender woman who had raised me single-handedly while my father was busy with his business. She was always there, listening, advising with her warm smile and comforting hugs. But when the truth about Paul and Claire came to light, everything changed. The memories pulled me back to that time like an old film being replayed. It was a drizzly afternoon in New York. I went to my mother's house after the final argument with Claire. I hadn't planned to tell her everything, but she looked into my eyes and knew immediately something was wrong. "Son, what happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. I sat down, tears streaming down my face, and told her everything. About Claire, about my father, about that disgusting betrayal. Her face went pale, her hands gripping the armrests tightly as if her heart were being crushed. "No. How could he do this?" she whispered, her voice breaking. It was a blow she was completely unprepared to endure. She had spent her whole life building the family, believing in Paul despite his frequent absences, and now everything collapsed in an instant. After that day, my mother declined rapidly. Her spirit broke. She spoke less, smiled less, and spent long nights sitting alone by the window, staring blankly at the bustling streets. The underlying heart condition she had kept hidden so as not to worry me worsened in a short time. She began coughing, feeling constant fatigue, and chest pains came more frequently. I took her to the doctor, who shook his head. "Mental stress is making the condition worse. She needs complete rest." But how could she rest? Every night she woke from nightmares calling Paul's name in her sleep, then crying silently. I stayed by her side the whole time, reminding her to take her medicine, but it was no use. Repeated checkups couldn't save her. Her body grew weaker, her skin pallid, her eyes losing their familiar warmth. She became distant, as if her soul had left her body long before it gave in. I clearly remember those afternoons sitting by her hospital bed, holding her hand, telling old stories to make her smile. "Mom, do you remember when I was little you used to bake apple pie for me?" She gave a faint smile. "Of course I do, son. But now Mom is tired." And then one morning she didn't wake up. The doctor confirmed acute heart failure caused by prolonged stress. She passed peacefully, but for me it was a nightmare that would never end. The day I received the news of her death, half my life died with her. The phone rang in the middle of the night from the hospital. "Mr. Henderson, we're very sorry." I dropped the phone, collapsed onto the floor, an overwhelming emptiness and numbness enveloping every thought. The world around me blurred. The sound of traffic outside became distant, and my heart felt like it had stopped. My mother, the only family I had left, was gone. I drove to the hospital in pouring rain. The rain lashed hard against the windshield while my tears blurred my vision so much that I had to pull over several times to breathe. Standing by her bed, looking at that peaceful yet cold face, everything inside me crumbled. I wanted to scream, to punch the walls, to do anything to make this pain disappear, but in the end I could only kneel down and clutch her hand tightly. "Mom, why did you leave me? Now that you're gone, how am I supposed to go on living?" I whispered, my voice breaking in my throat. In that moment I realized I was completely alone. No one left to share with, no one to lean on. The shock paralyzed me. I sat motionless beside her for hours until a hospital staff member gently placed a hand on my shoulder and led me out of the room. I was the one who handled the entire funeral arrangements, from paperwork to the smallest details. All the responsibility fell on me alone, while Paul, my father, couldn't be bothered. I called him, voice shaking. "Dad, Mom has passed away." He was silent for a moment, then said coldly, "I'm busy. You handle it." Not a word of condolence, not a gesture of grief. He didn't even ask about her, the wife who had devoted her whole life to him. I gritted my teeth, swallowed my tears, and started organizing. Choosing the casket, contacting relatives, selecting flowers, choosing music, everything. I ran back and forth between the funeral home and Mom's house, paperwork piling up, phone ringing constantly. Those nights I couldn't sleep properly, dreaming that Mom came back smiling at me, then vanishing. In the morning I threw myself into the tasks again, trying to stay calm so I wouldn't collapse. The funeral was simple and dignified, just as Mom would have wanted. No extravagance, only friends and acquaintances coming to pay their respects in good numbers. A small funeral home in the suburbs of New York with old wooden chairs and the faint scent of lilies. I stood by the casket, greeting everyone, shaking hands, receiving condolences. "We mourn Eleanor," they said, eyes red. But the seat reserved for Paul remained empty. I had saved a spot in the front row, hoping he would show up, even if only for appearances. But he didn't. His absence made the funeral atmosphere even more desolate, like a vast void swallowing everything. Relatives began whispering, "Where's Paul? Why didn't he come?" The murmurs spread, mingling with the sobs. I heard it all but pretended not to. The pitying looks mixed with sarcasm deepened my pain even further. Poor Noah, having to handle everything alone. Paul is now living with his former daughter-in-law, forgetting his old wife. Those words cut like knives, making me want to run away, but I stood firm, gritting my teeth and enduring. The funeral ended with Mom's favorite song, an old ballad, and everyone left, leaving me alone by the grave. In the midst of those days of mourning, my pain was deepened in an unexpected way. I wasn't in the habit of scrolling social media, but a relative sent me a link with a short note. "Noah, I think you should see this." I clicked on it almost reflexively, and in that instant my heart stopped. On the screen were vacation photos of Paul and Claire posted just a few days earlier. White sandy beaches in Hawaii, a 5-star resort. They stood side by side, beaming, cocktails in hand, with a caption that was cruelly cold. Happy together, enjoying this wonderful getaway and the great things ahead. Those smiles, those affectionate gestures, in complete contrast to the loss I was bearing. My mother lay cold in the ground while they basked in sun and sea. That moment left me numb. I collapsed onto the floor, the phone slipping from my hand. I realized their shamelessness and moral decay had crossed every boundary I once believed existed. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had indirectly killed my mother. How could they laugh and play like that? How could they forget everything? Rage surged, but I didn't scream or smash anything. I just sat there, tears streaming down, and silently vowed, "They will pay." Back to the cold meal in front of me, I pushed the plate aside, unable to swallow another bite. Pain and silent hatred enveloped me like a heavy cloak. I was fully aware that my mother's death was tied to the betrayal of those two people, Paul and Claire. It was a memory I would never forget and never forgive. Every day that passed, I lived with it, nurtured it, not to destroy myself, but to remind myself to stay strong. The upcoming wedding would be the opportunity, not for blind revenge, but to confront them, to prove that I am not the failure they think I am. I stood up, cleared the kitchen table, and looked out the window. New York City was still bustling, but inside me a storm was forming. Thrilling, dramatic, and unpredictable. I would wait for that day to come, and when it did, everything would change. The days that followed passed like a prolonged nightmare. I returned to my work at the legal office, handling files, attending meetings, but my mind was always wandering. Every morning when I woke up, I saw the wedding invitation still lying on the table, and the anger surged anew. I didn't call anyone, didn't share with old friends. They had long since disappeared from my life. Instead, I spent my time thinking and planning, not a plan to destroy, but a plan to survive, to prove something. I exercised more, running along the Hudson River in the evenings, making my body stronger and my mind clearer. Each step was a reminder. They had taken so much from me, but they couldn't take my will. Finally, the day arrived, the wedding day of Paul and Claire. I woke up early, showered thoroughly, and chose the simplest clothes from my closet, a white shirt, black trousers, and an old pair of leather shoes. No flashy suit, no tie, nothing ostentatious. I went alone. No need for anyone beside me to prove my worth. I took a taxi to the hotel, my heart pounding in my chest. The car sped through the crowded streets of Manhattan, past skyscrapers glittering under the spring sun, and I wondered, what am I doing? But then my mother's image appeared in my mind, her warm smile, and the pain of that loss pushed me forward. I wouldn't back down. I arrived on time, stepped into the main lobby with a calm expression, and quietly blended into this unfamiliar space. The ceremony was held at one of New York's most luxurious five-star hotels, the Plaza, with a ballroom dazzling under crystal chandeliers, gilded walls, and polished marble floors. The air was filled with the scent of fresh roses and premium champagne. The guests were mostly from high society, businessmen in expensive tuxedos, politicians with polished fake smiles, and prominent figures, from bank executives to television stars. They laughed and chatted lively, raising glasses and toasts, as if this were the event of the year. A live orchestra played melodious violin music, and at the center of the hall was a banquet table laden with exquisite dishes: grilled lobster, black caviar, and towering wedding cakes. I looked around feeling like I had stepped into another world, the world Claire had always craved, the world my father had built with money and connections. But to me it was all just a facade, a stage for them to perform their charade of happiness. I chose to stand in a shadowed corner near the window overlooking Central Park, observing everything from a distance. No attempt to draw attention, no pushing into the crowd. I simply watched silently as the two people who had destroyed my life got married. Paul in his shiny black suit, his silver hair adding to his authoritative aura, and Claire in her pure white wedding gown sparkling with diamonds, looking like a queen. They stood hand in hand, beaming, receiving congratulations from the guests. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breathing steady. My heart pounded, a light sweat beating on my forehead despite the cool air. This was the moment. I reminded myself, don't react, don't let them see weakness, just stand here, observe, and wait. Despite trying to keep my distance, my presence was quickly noticed. First by a relative, then by a family friend. Curious glances began turning toward me, followed by unkind whispers. Isn't that Noah? Paul's son? Why is he here after everything? The murmurs spread like ripples on water, making me feel as if I were being examined under a magnifying glass. Some looked at me with pity, others with stifled giggles as if I were a joke. I stood straight, staring ahead, trying to ignore it. But inside, the anger began to boil. They thought I was the loser, a ghost from the past. But I was here to prove the opposite. Then they approached, Paul and Claire arm in arm, walking confidently through the ballroom straight toward me. Their faces were full of arrogance, as if they were the absolute victors in a game I had lost long ago. Claire smiled, but it was a smile sharp as a knife. Paul looked me up and down with his familiar contemptuous gaze. They stopped in front of me, and the air around us suddenly fell silent. Nearby guests stopped talking and turned to watch, as if waiting for an entertaining drama. "Oh, Noah, you came after all." Paul spoke first, his voice louder than necessary, deliberately projecting to draw attention. "I didn't think you'd show up. After everything, you still have some courage, huh?" He laughed, but it was laced with sarcasm. Claire chimed in, her voice artificially sweet. "That's right, darling. Noah, did you come to wish us well? Or just to remind us of old failures?" They openly mocked my past, alluding to my failures, my stagnation, and how I had been left behind while they rose higher. Paul patted my shoulder in a pretended friendly gesture that was full of disdain. "Son, look at you. Still the same old look, no change in 4 years. That mediocre lawyer job still going okay? Or are you still struggling with small-time cases?" Claire continued, implying that after 4 years I was still just a quiet sideliner. No family, no status, no one who truly remembered me, existing like a shadow that left no trace. She tilted her head, looking at me with fake pity, the corner of her mouth curling as if bestowing a favor. "Noah, you should find someone. Living alone like this must be so lonely." She paused for a beat, then continued in a light but mocking tone. "Or are you still clinging to the past?" "We're not. We've moved on." Claire squeezed Paul's hand, holding her head high in the ballroom. "We're building a new life, a better one, a real one." Her voice echoed in the vast space, loud enough for those around to hear. A few stifled laughs rang out, unrestrained. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, Claire turned back to me with a casual smile. "Oh, by the way, from now on when you see me, remember to call me Mom, okay, Noah? After all, I'm about to officially take that role." Paul added his open contempt, his voice lowering but deliberately raised. "You see, Noah, this ceremony is proof." He gestured around the lavish ballroom. "Claire and I are starting over. No more outdated ties, no more mistakes holding us back." His gaze fixed on me, cold and final. "And you're just part of the past. A mistake that should be forgotten." Claire didn't miss the chance, turning to a nearby group of guests with a smile as if sharing an amusing story. "Everyone, look, Noah is a very clear lesson. If you can't keep up with the times, you'll be left behind. We're different. We're successful. We're happy." Those words quickly spread through the hall. Guests began pointing, whispering. Some laughed openly, others looked at me with curiosity mixed with disdain, as if witnessing an unexpected sideshow. A woman leaned close to the person beside her, whispering but loud enough for me to hear. "Poor guy. What's he even doing here?" The other replied with a faint smirk, "Just embarrassing himself." Scattered laughter echoed through the ballroom, making the atmosphere tense like a string pulled to its limit. I swallowed my rage, keeping my face calm. My heart pounded wildly, blood rushing to my head, but I didn't react, didn't defend myself. I stood tall, looking directly at the two people in front of me, eyes unblinking. In my mind, memories of my mother, the betrayal, the cold funeral flooded back. But I pushed them down, keeping my voice steady if I had to speak. But I said nothing, just silence. That silence was like a wall, impenetrable. Paul frowned, Claire bit her lip. They wanted me to explode, to argue, so they could have an excuse to throw me out as a troublemaker. But I denied them that. My silence and indifferent demeanor didn't satisfy them. On the contrary, it frustrated Paul and Claire even more because they didn't get the reaction they craved. Paul lost patience, his voice lowering but betraying tension. "What's wrong, Noah? Gone mute? Nothing to say?" Despite trying to sound tough, his voice trembled slightly, as if my composure was unsettling him. After a few tense moments, they walked away in irritation, turning their backs and melting into the crowd. But the stares didn't stop. Guests still whispered, still pointed. But now there was something different. A genuine curiosity, as if they were wondering why I hadn't reacted. I stood still in my spot, quietly watching their figures in the opulent ballroom, emotions completely hidden. My heart still raced, but no longer from fear, from anticipation. As if waiting for another moment when everything would shift. I knew that moment was coming. Not today, not here, but it would come. And when it did, this stage would be mine. The atmosphere in the ballroom still carried the echoes of that confrontation. Whispers hovered around me like persistent buzzing bees that refused to stop. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my breathing steady, my eyes fixed on Paul and Claire as they mingled back into the crowd, laughing and chatting with other guests as if nothing had happened. But I could see it clearly. Paul's shoulders had stiffened slightly. Claire's smile was a little forced. They thought they had won, that they had humiliated me in front of everyone. But the game had only just begun. I reminded myself, "Stay calm, Noah. Don't let them see you waver." I took a sip of water from a glass on a nearby table. The cool liquid sliding down my throat helped me stay alert. The ballroom remained dazzling with crystal chandeliers, the violins still playing melodiously. But to me, it was all just the backdrop for a much larger play. Just as Paul and Claire had walked away and were about to fully blend into the crowd, a middle-aged man approached me. He walked slowly, his expression serious yet cautious, as if weighing every step. I recognized him immediately. Jonathan Hale, a high-ranking official in the U.S. Department of Justice. I had met him a few times at internal briefings, but here, amid this festive setting, his presence felt like a surprise. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, his hair silver with a few strands of gray, and his eyes carried the familiar sharpness of someone in the judicial field. Jonathan Hale was a well-known figure in political and legal circles. He handled major federal cases, from anti-corruption to national security. Many guests here only dared to observe him from afar, whispering about the rumors surrounding him. His approach quickly drew attention, like a stone dropped into a calm pond, sending ripples outward. He stopped in front of me and gave a polite nod. "Mr. Noah Henderson, correct?" he said, his voice deep and clear. I nodded, slightly surprised but keeping my composure. Jonathan introduced himself even though we had met before. "I'm Jonathan Hale from the Department of Justice. Very pleased to meet you here." That introduction immediately sparked whispers around us. Nearby guests turned their heads, eyes widening, murmuring to each other, "Jonathan Hale? Why is he talking to him? Who is that guy to be approached by Hale?" The atmosphere suddenly shifted, from the earlier mockery directed at me to curiosity about why a major figure like Hale would stop to speak with someone who had just been publicly ridiculed. I could feel the stares burning into me like spotlights. My heart beat faster, but I maintained a faint smile, hiding my excitement. Doubtful glances quickly spread through the crowd, carrying discomfort and disbelief, as if something was veering off the script they had assumed. They were used to seeing me as the loser, a ghost from the past, and now Hale's attention was upending everything. A few people whispered louder, "Is there some mistake? He's just Paul's son. Hale never talks to ordinary people." I stood still, letting the moment linger, feeling time slow down. Jonathan was in no hurry. He looked at me with genuine respect, not the fake kind shown by the other guests. The explanation came soon after, as Jonathan carefully confirmed my identity and mentioned that he remembered me from a special federal legal briefing in Washington the previous month, one that only a select few were allowed to attend. "I remember you from the session in Washington last month," he said, loud enough for those around to hear clearly. "You're one of the top experts on complex cases. Your work at the DOJ is truly impressive." That moment froze the ballroom. The whispers abruptly stopped, then erupted into astonished gasps that spread rapidly from group to group. "DOJ? He works at the Department of Justice? A top expert? No way!" The gasps echoed, making the air vibrate. I felt the shift, from contempt to surprise, from pity to genuine curiosity. My heart pounded, but I remained calm, as if this were nothing unusual. The unusual commotion made Paul and Claire turn back. They had been laughing with a group of businessmen, but the gasps pulled them back to reality. Their faces quickly changed. Paul went pale. Claire bit her lip. Her eyes panicked as she realized the center of attention was no longer them, but me. They stood frozen in the crowd, like two forgotten statues. I could clearly see the confusion on Paul's face. He frowned, trying to understand what was happening. Claire stared at me in shock, as if she had just been slapped. They thought they controlled everything, but now the stage was shifting. I maintained my composure, not rushing, only nodding in confirmation after a long enough pause, as if being recognized or not didn't concern me at all. "Yes, that's right, Mr. Hale. You haven't mistaken me," I said evenly. "Pleasure to see you again." I didn't boast, didn't explain, just simply confirmed. That calmness astonished the crowd even more. Immediately, Jonathan smiled more openly and engaged in friendly conversation with me, showing absolute respect, the kind he hadn't extended to anyone else in the ballroom. "You're doing excellent work on the recent case," he said, his voice low but audible. "Your analyses have helped us advance significantly. If you have time, we should discuss further." We talked for a few minutes about work, without revealing details, but enough for everyone around to understand that I was no ordinary person. The crowd now gradually realized that the man they had just mocked was far from insignificant, and their earlier contempt was backfiring bitterly. The whispers changed direction. "He works at the DOJ? Why didn't Paul mention it? They made a mistake humiliating him." I felt the change, looks now filled with admiration instead of disdain. Paul and Claire visibly showed confusion and loss of control. Their eyes panicked as they realized their status in the ballroom was shaking while I had unexpectedly become the center. Paul tried to smile, but it was crooked. Claire gripped Paul's hand tightly, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Some guests appeared annoyed, feeling that Paul and Claire had ruined a chance to connect with an important figure, shifting the atmosphere from curiosity to discomfort. I overheard snippets. "Paul, you really were foolish, humiliating your own son in front of everyone. Now look, we've lost the chance to talk to Mr. Hale." Those words made Paul and Claire even more flustered. Many others quickly approached me, initiating greetings and trying to strike up conversations, turning the wedding into a place where I inadvertently became the focal point. "Mr. Henderson, it's an honor to meet you," a businessman said, shaking my hand. "I had no idea you worked at the DOJ. Could we exchange business cards?" I responded politely but kept my distance. This wasn't the time to make friends. Amid the chaos, I looked toward the two people standing frozen in the ballroom and gave a slight smile. That smile was for them, not mocking but a reminder that the game had changed. Paul avoided my gaze. Claire stared back with hatred. I knew this moment was the turning point. Then, citing urgent work, I left amid the respectful silence and heavy atmosphere behind me. "Thank you, Mr. Hale, for taking the time to speak with me," I said, shaking his hand. "I have an urgent matter. I must leave now." I walked out of the ballroom, feeling the eyes following me, and when the hotel doors closed behind me, I exhaled in relief. My heart was still racing, but now from satisfaction. They had revealed their true selves, arrogant people now trembling. And I had revealed mine, not a failure, but the one holding the keys. The game continues, and this time I'm in the lead. On the taxi ride home, the New York night wind whipped through the slightly open window, carrying the smell of exhaust fumes and blaring horns. I leaned my head back against the seat, eyes closed, but the images from the evening kept swirling in my mind. Claire's forced smile, Paul's pale face when Jonathan Hale spoke to me. They thought they controlled everything, but in a single moment their world had begun to waver. I smiled to myself. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Good news today, sir? You look happy." I nodded but didn't reply. "Good news?" Not exactly. It was a cold satisfaction, like knowing a secret your enemy is oblivious to. Back at the apartment, I took off my clothes, brewed a strong black coffee, and sat by the window overlooking the street. Tonight, sleep would be hard to come by, but that was fine. I had waited 4 years for this moment, and now the wheels of justice were starting to turn. After the wedding, my life gradually returned to its old rhythm. Work at the Department of Justice pulled me into long days of processing files, as if everything that had just happened was merely a cut carefully hidden away. I woke up at 6 in the morning, jogged along the Hudson River to shake off fatigue, then headed to the office, a modern glass building in Lower Manhattan where major cases were handled in silence. Colleagues greeted me as usual. "Hey Noah, any new cases today?" I gave a faint smile, shook my head, and buried myself in paperwork. No one knew about the wedding. No one knew about Paul and Claire. I kept it secret, like an ace hidden up my sleeve. Calls from wedding guests, businessmen wanting to connect, I turned them all down. "Thank you, but I'm busy right now," I'd say, then hang up. Life was simple: work, meals alone, and nights reflecting on the past. But now that past no longer weighed me down. It had become fuel, a smoldering fire waiting to flare up. One day, everything changed. It was a drizzly afternoon. The office was filled with the smell of coffee and the clatter of keyboards. I was receiving and reviewing pre-investigation files transferred to my section. Cases involving unusual financial activities, often signs of corruption or money laundering. I flipped through the new dossier, my eyes scanning numbers, charts, and company names. At first, nothing stood out, just convoluted transactions, money flowing through multiple intermediaries. But then, as I examined the legal entities, corporate structures, and ultimate representatives more closely, I froze. My heart pounded as if someone were squeezing it. It was Paul's company, Henderson Enterprises, with him listed as chairman of the board. His name was printed clearly on the documents, along with his familiar signature. I paused, hands trembling, staring at the page as if it might disappear. How could this be? A coincidence? No, it wasn't. I knew my father's company well, a real estate and investment empire that appeared glamorous on the surface but now revealed clear cracks. I spent hours reading the entire file, closing my office door to avoid interruptions. The deeper I went, the more serious it became. Money routed through a series of offshore accounts, shell companies set up in the Cayman Islands and Delaware, places notorious for lax tax laws. Clear signs of money laundering, funds from unclear sources cleaned through fake contracts, then returned to the U.S. as legitimate investments. There were also indications of evading legal obligations, inflated expenses, hidden profits to dodge federal taxes. What was documented was no longer mere accounting errors or minor administrative violations. This was a systematic pattern of criminal behavior that, if prosecuted, could land Paul in serious legal trouble, potentially years in prison, massive fines, even asset seizure. I slumped into my chair, mind reeling. This was my father, the man who had betrayed me, but still my own flesh and blood. Did he know? Or was he a victim of someone else? Deep down, though, I knew the truth. Paul was always the one in control, ambitious and blinded. I was torn between professional duty and blood ties. As a DOJ expert, I couldn't ignore it. That would be an ethical violation, risking my job. But Paul was my father, even though he had turned his back on my mother and me. I spent the entire afternoon thinking, pacing the office, staring out the window at the steady rain. Finally, I decided I had to confront him. I photographed and photocopied the key sections of the file, not to misuse them, but to have evidence for the conversation. I tucked them into my briefcase, left the office earlier than usual, and drove to Paul's house, a luxurious villa in the New York suburbs where he and Claire lived like royalty. My heart pounded the whole way. Rain lashed against the windshield as if foretelling an approaching storm. I wondered, how would they react? Deny it? Beg? The anticipation made my hands grip the steering wheel tightly. I showed up at my father's house unannounced. The doorbell rang and Claire opened the door, her face showing clear surprise. She was wearing elegant loungewear, hair neatly tied back, but her eyes were wary and guarded, as if she sensed trouble. "Noah, what are you doing here?" she asked coldly. Paul appeared behind her in a bathrobe, glass of wine in hand. "What brings you here, son?" he said, but his voice wavered slightly. They invited me into the living room, a vast space with expensive furniture, wall art, and a roaring fireplace. I sat on the sofa. They sat opposite me, the atmosphere tense as a drawn bowstring. Claire poured me water, but her hand trembled slightly. They knew something was wrong, perhaps since the wedding they had suspected. I didn't beat around the bush. "Dad, I'm not here about family matters," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "I'm here about your company." Paul froze for a moment. I continued, not giving him a chance to dodge. "I've seen the file. The unusual transactions, the fragmented money flows routed through inactive entities, shell companies. That's money laundering. You know that, don't you?" Paul shot to his feet, face flushed red. "What the hell are you talking about?" he growled. "Fabrications. What right do you have to accuse me? Or can't you get over the past, so now you're back for revenge?" The wine in his glass sloshed, nearly spilling. Claire immediately jumped in, her eyes coldly scanning me. "Exactly, Noah. You're just jealous. After the wedding, you couldn't accept it, could you?" she sneered. "This is slander. Where did you get this stuff? Made it up yourself?" I didn't respond to the bait. I opened my briefcase, pulled out the photocopied file, placed it firmly on the table, and slid it toward Paul. "This isn't speculation," I said slowly. "These are documents from the DOJ. Read them yourself." Paul's face flickered. He leaned down, flipped through a few pages, his eyes darting over the numbers and diagrams. For a brief moment, panic was evident. But then he shoved the file away hard as if it could burn him. He shouted, "It's all fake. You abused your position to fabricate evidence and frame me." His voice cracked. "You traitor," Claire piled on, her voice rising as she tried to regain control. "Noah, you really are a family betrayer." She pointed straight at me. "You're using justice as a shield to destroy us. You think you're noble? No, you're just a loser who wants to drag everyone down with you." I sat still, letting them rant. Anger boiled in my chest, but I held it back. The more I watched, the clearer it became. There wasn't a trace of remorse here. No admission, just denial, blame, and attack. Paul repeated it like a mantra to reassure himself. "I didn't do anything wrong. This is a conspiracy. It's all a conspiracy." Claire switched to fake sobbing, voice choked. "You're destroying this family, Noah. Do you even know what you're doing?" Watching them, a cold realization hit me. This was no longer a confrontation. It was a performance they had rehearsed for so long that they believed it themselves. And in that performance, truth had no place. Finally, I stood up and gathered the files. "I warned you, but you insist on denying it. Now I'll let justice take its course." I left the house in silence, no further argument, deciding to withdraw completely from any personal involvement. Rain was still falling outside. I drove home with an empty mind. No matter how brutal the outcome, I couldn't stop it. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. Back home, I lay awake, thinking of my mother. What would she think? Would she forgive Paul? But I couldn't. The storm was coming, and this time I wasn't the victim. The days following that confrontation passed in a simmering tension. I returned to the office, burying myself in work as usual, but this time everything felt different. Every morning I checked the DOJ's internal emails and scanned legal updates, my heart beating faster than normal. I had recused myself from the case to avoid any conflict of interest, handing it over to colleagues, but I still followed it from afar. Not out of curiosity, but to ensure the wheels of justice kept turning. And then just a few days later, the news came. Paul's company, Henderson Enterprises, had officially come under federal criminal investigation. I read the email in my office, holding a cup of cold coffee, and it felt as if a heavy stone had been lifted from my chest. They were moving forward. The FBI, IRS, and SEC were all involved, acting on the initial evidence from the file I had uncovered. I slumped into my chair and let out a long breath. No elation, just a cold sense of relief. At last, that dirty truth was being exposed. The authorities moved in unison and everything unfolded rapidly like a whirlwind. Funds were temporarily frozen, millions of dollars in bank accounts locked, preventing Paul's company from operating normally. I imagined Paul sitting in his office, staring at the bank notices, his face ashen. Accounting records were seized. Investigation teams raided the main headquarters in central Manhattan, armed with search warrants, turning everything upside down from filing cabinets to computers. The network of subsidiaries and related entities was thoroughly scrutinized. The shell companies overseas, the offshore accounts I had seen in the file. I received updates from colleagues. "Noah, this case is huge. They're digging deep." I nodded without comment, but inside anticipation surged. Would Paul try to flee, or would he fight? The searches were conducted at the main headquarters and several satellite offices, sending ripples through the city. I read internal reports. Server computers were sealed, years of transaction data extracted for cross-verification. They carted away terabytes of data, emails, contracts, meeting minutes, all to be analyzed by experts. I pictured the scene. Company employees panicking, huddling to the side as FBI agents in blue windbreakers entered, shouting, "This is a search warrant. No one leaves." Paul was probably there, trying to maintain composure, but his hands shaking as he signed the receipt. And Claire? As the one overseeing finances, she must have been frantic. I didn't contact them. No calls, no messages. I just watched from a distance like a ghost. Each new update made my heart race. They were getting closer to the truth. Paul and Claire were repeatedly served subpoenas, required to give statements multiple times as company executives and financial controllers. I learned through internal sources they had to report to the FBI office in New York, sitting for hours in cold interrogation rooms under fluorescent lights. Each time they returned home, they carried unmistakable exhaustion and panic. I imagined Claire driving back, face gaunt, lipstick smudged, whispering to Paul, "They know everything." Paul shouting, slamming the table, but to no avail. Longtime partners began cutting ties, unanswered calls, canceled contracts. Several senior executives resigned or cooperated with the investigation, causing the company structure to fracture from within. I heard that one vice president had turned, providing evidence in exchange for leniency. The company, the empire Paul had taken such pride in, was crumbling piece by piece. I lay in bed late at night thinking about it, feeling like an undercurrent was rising. Thrilling, dramatic. I didn't know how it would end, but I knew it was coming. Once enough preliminary evidence was gathered, the case moved to the prosecution phase. I received notification. A formal criminal trial was scheduled at the federal courthouse in Manhattan. The case drew attention from financial and legal circles, media coverage, analysts commenting on television. The biggest money laundering case of the year, they called it. I read everything but made no comment. Paul hired expensive lawyers trying to build a defense, but I knew the evidence was too solid. The trial was about to begin, and I decided to attend, not to witness the collapse, but to close this chapter. I prepared myself mentally, dress simply, sit in the public gallery, observe in silence. My heart pounded at the thought of that day. Would Paul look at me? Would Claire cry? The trial lasted for weeks, with every transaction, every shell company, and every signature publicly dissected. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, lawyers, and the curious. The judge, a stern woman in black-rimmed glasses, banged the gavel, and it began. Prosecutors presented evidence. Complex flowcharts of money projected on screens, proving how millions of dollars were laundered through layers of intermediaries. "This is Shell Company A, established in the Caymans, receiving funds from illicit sources," they said, pointing to the screen. Paul sat in the defendant's chair wearing a gray suit, face rigid. Claire sat nearby as a witness at first, but gradually became a secondary defendant. Each day another piece was revealed: Paul's signatures on fake contracts, Claire's emails directing transfers. Every line of denial gradually collapsed. Their lawyers argued, "These are merely accounting errors." But it was futile. The evidence was overwhelming. As the evidence was presented in court, Paul's face increasingly betrayed panic. He had started confident, sitting upright, whispering to his lawyer. But when the prosecutor displayed his email, "Transfer it immediately, no questions," he bowed his head, hands gripping the rail tightly. Familiar defenses no longer worked. He couldn't explain the money's origins, couldn't deny the signatures. I sat in the back row watching, heart pounding. No joy, just a deep sadness. This was my father, the man who once taught me to ride a bike, now sitting there like a criminal. Claire, who had always been so confidently in control, began to unravel. She took the witness stand, voice trembling. "I didn't know anything." But as the financial transactions she had overseen were publicly exposed, "You signed this, didn't you?" she stammered, tears streaming down. She looked to Paul for help, but he avoided her gaze. The courtroom fell deathly silent, broken only by reporters' whispers. The tension built. Each night I went home, lay awake, wondering, how would it end? On sentencing day, the courtroom atmosphere was heavy as lead. Everyone sat still, waiting. The judge read the verdict, voice steady but sharp, based on irrefutable evidence of money laundering, financial fraud, and concealment of illegal transactions. The court sentences Paul Henderson to 18 years in federal prison. All related assets are sealed and confiscated. The moment the sentence was pronounced, Paul froze in shock, face ashen, eyes vacant. He stood, but his legs buckled, forcing him to lean on the table. All the power and prestige he had clung to meant nothing now. He was just an old criminal, handcuffed and led away. Claire sobbed uncontrollably, covering her face, but no one comforted her. I sat quietly. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just a cold emptiness as the price of betrayal was finally settled. I didn't look back, didn't seek anyone's gaze, because this moment held no meaning of victory, only the end of a brutal chapter. Reporters rushed forward, but I slipped away, leaving the courtroom in silence. Outside, the New York sky was gray, the wind biting cold. I drove home carrying the truth that justice had spoken, even if it couldn't bring my mother back. At home, I sat alone, looking at her photo on the table, tears rolling down my cheeks. "Mom, it's over," I whispered. But the pain remained and life went on. The thrill was gone, only emptiness left. 3 months after the trial passed in a strange rhythm, I returned to my work at the DOJ handling new cases, but everything seemed more blurred than before. Every morning I woke up, brewed coffee, jogged along the Hudson River to shake off the heavy thoughts. Colleagues patted my shoulder. "Noah, you okay?" The Henderson case was huge. The media's still covering it. I gave a faint smile, nodded as if I were fine. But inside, that emptiness grew larger. Paul was in federal prison, a facility on the outskirts of New York where once powerful men were reduced to mere inmate numbers. Claire had vanished from the radar, no news, no contact. I overheard from colleagues that she was living in seclusion, avoiding the public eye. I didn't seek them out, didn't call, just lived my own life. But then, one drizzly afternoon, memories began flooding back. I sat by the window watching the rain patter down and decided I needed to see Paul. Not out of anger anymore. That anger had cooled after the trial. Just to close the chapter, to listen, to understand. My heart pounded at the thought of the meeting, nervous, but not the kind of thrill born from revenge. It was the nervousness of a son facing his father after years of fracture. A week later, I applied for a prison visit. The process was tedious. Paperwork checks, body searches, waiting in a cold holding room that reeked of strong disinfectant. I sat there, hands clenched tightly, mind swirling with questions. What would he say? Remorse? Or still denial? Finally, I was led into the visitation room, a cramped space with a glass partition, old telephones and cameras monitoring every move. I sat down, heart pounding, and waited. The explosive anger was gone. Only an indescribable silence remained, as if I were confronting a part of the past that had died but still haunted me. Paul was brought in by a burly guard. He walked slowly, looking gaunt and noticeably thinner than the last time I saw him in court. The gray prison uniform hung loosely on his frail frame, his silver hair disheveled and his eyes weary, stripped of the confidence that once belonged to a man accustomed to the pinnacle of power. He had once been an imposing businessman in expensive suits with a conquering smile. Now he was just a tired old man sitting down opposite me across the glass. He picked up the receiver, voice hoarse. "So you finally came to see me?" I nodded, saying nothing at first, just looking at him. In that moment, the air was heavy as lead. Noise from other visitation booths echoed faintly. But between us, only silence. I felt the anticipation rising, not fear, but waiting for the words to come. Paul bowed his head before me, hands clasped tightly on the cold metal table. He didn't dare look up, voice trembling and halting. "I'm sorry, son. I was wrong from the very beginning." He took a deep breath, as if gathering all his courage to continue. "I single-handedly brought our family to this end. I betrayed your mother, I betrayed you, and I thought I could live with it." Those words landed heavily, no longer sharp as before, only leaving a lingering, dull ache. Paul looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed. "I regret it, but it's too late now. I chased ambition, the feeling of controlling everything. I thought I was strong, smart, that I could manipulate people and money alike." A bitter smile flickered. "But it turns out I was just a fool." I didn't interrupt, just listened quietly as he delved deeper, peeling back pieces of the past slowly. "All those years I trusted Claire blindly," Paul said, voice growing raspier. "She told me everything was under control, that it was the way to build a bigger, stronger empire." He shook his head. "I believed her, because I loved her, or at least I thought I did. According to him, legally he was the named owner of the company, the final signatory, the one responsible before the law. But in reality it was entirely different. Everything behind the scenes was controlled by Claire, he said, voice full of bitterness. The books, the accounts, the financial decisions, all of it. Paul gave a faint, wry smile. I signed papers without reading them carefully. I let her handle everything, from transfers, setting up subsidiaries, to opening offshore accounts. I was just the name on paper. My mind reeled as he continued. There were large transfers that even I didn't fully understand the origins of, he said. Once I asked where this money came from. Paul closed his eyes briefly as if recalling every word. She laughed and said, "Don't worry, darling, it's legitimate investment." He sighed, and I believed it, because her explanations were clever enough, convincing enough that I didn't ask any more questions. He looked at me, eyes heavy. I wanted to hold on to my status, my power. I thought I was running the game, but in truth I was just a legal shield for things I wasn't sober enough to oversee. And then I lost everything. Paul fell silent for a long while, then continued, voice breaking. Only after the sentencing, when the cell door closed, did I understand. Claire cut me off completely. No visits, no calls, not even a letter. He gave a bitter laugh. I waited day after day, but it was pointless. She abandoned me like an old piece of junk. In the cold confines of the prison, gray walls, the clanging of locks echoing, Paul looked at me, voice almost a whisper. That's when I realized I was never the one in control. Tears rolled down his face. I was just a puppet, used until I had no more value. She used me to hide things, to launder money, and when it all collapsed, she ran. I sat there imagining Paul alone in his cell, facing the years of his own blindness. Was this the truth, or just a belated excuse? But his voice now held none of the old arrogance, only emptiness and remorse. I listened to it all, neither contradicting nor rushing to forgive. The wounds from the past remained, the image of my mother breaking down, the cold funeral, the double betrayal that could never be erased. I looked at him, heart aching. I've heard everything. I understand how it all came to this. But forgiveness isn't something that can happen instantly. I need time, not to forget but to accept. Paul nodded slowly, eyes red. I understand. I don't deserve to demand it. He was silent for a long time, then added softly, voice lowering. I'm sorry it took me this long to say these things. All this time I was still fooling myself that she would come back. I waited, even knowing it was hopeless. He looked up at me, eyes weary. Only when you walked in here today did I realize I was waiting for something that no longer exists. The day you came, it was the final straw that made me unable to stay silent anymore. The visit ended in silence. The guard approached and led him away. Paul's frail figure gradually disappeared behind the closing iron door. I sat there a few more minutes, mind in turmoil. But I knew I had finally understood the full truth behind the case. Claire wasn't just a criminal, she was the true mastermind. Paul, though he bore responsibility, was merely a puppet of his own greed and blindness. That didn't erase the pain, but at least it closed the questions I had carried for years. Leaving the prison, I carried a cold clarity. Stepping outside, the biting wind whipped my face, the sky gray like my mood. I drove home, mind swirling with his words. Fully aware that justice had done its part, Paul in prison, Claire on the run. But forgiveness or not would be a choice I needed more time to face. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table, brewed hot tea, and thought of my mother. Mom, Dad is remorseful now, I whispered. But tears fell, not from joy but from the emptiness. After the prison visit, I carried Paul's confessions with me and spent many days reflecting on them. Those words were like a time bomb in my mind, not exploding immediately but slowly spreading, making me see Claire's true nature from an entirely different angle for the first time. Before, she was my ex-wife, the betrayer, the one who stole my father and indirectly drove my mother to her death. But now, Through Paul's words, she emerged as the mastermind, a spider weaving a web of dark financial schemes. I lay in bed late at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the years of our marriage. The arguments, the contempt for my job, the twisted admiration for Paul, all of it now seemed part of a larger plan. She wasn't just ambitious, she was calculating, cold-blooded. My heart pounded as I thought about it, thrilled, not with fear, but with a curiosity mixed with horror. Had she planned it from the beginning? Was our marriage just a cover? I took a few days off, sitting alone in the apartment, sifting through memories. I pulled out an old photo album, pictures of us beaming at our wedding, vacations that I now knew were funded with dirty money. I whispered, staring at her face in the photos. Who was Claire, really? Paul's accounts of how she controlled the finances, making transfers he knew nothing about, wouldn't let me sit still. Faced with signs of an unexposed criminal, I had no choice but to act. As a DOJ employee, I couldn't ignore it. That was my duty, the oath I had taken when I joined. I sat at my home desk, opened my laptop, and drafted an official report. I documented Paul's new statements, detailed, objective, without emotional embellishment. Based on the testimony of defendant Paul Henderson, I wrote, my hand trembling slightly. I recommended expanding the scope of the investigation through proper channels, forwarding everything to an independent unit with no conflict of interest. I was Paul's son, Claire's ex-husband. I couldn't participate directly. I sent the report via internal email, then shut down the computer and sighed. The wheels were turning again, this time aimed at Claire. The investigation proceeded quietly, without fanfare or announcements. I followed it from afar through colleagues. Brief updates, no details to avoid leaks. Financial transactions were traced backward, layer by layer, from my father's company to familiar entities bearing Claire's family name. The first news came after a few weeks. Noah, the case has expanded. There are links to Claire's family. My heart pounded. Anticipation surged, like knowing a secret was about to be revealed. They dug deep into the books, tracking money flows from Henderson Enterprises to companies bearing Claire's surname. Names I had vaguely heard during our marriage, like those of her parents' businesses. Everything happened silently. FBI agents working at night, analyzing data, not a word in the press. I lay awake, imagining them at their screens, connecting the dots. The truths emerged gradually, like peeling layers of an onion. Shell companies were set up across multiple states and countries, Delaware, Nevada, even the Cayman Islands and Panama, existing only on paper but constantly receiving and transferring large sums. I read a summary report from a colleague. Millions of dollars flowing through with no clear origin. The hidden account network was dissected, revealing money being split, circulated, and legitimized through multiple intermediaries. It was a classic cross-border money laundering model. Dirty money from dark sources cleaned through chains of fake transactions, then returned as legitimate investments. I slumped in my chair thinking about it. Claire, the woman who had once slept beside me, whispered words of love, now appeared as a professional criminal. Thrilled and horrified, had she intended to deceive me from the start? As the investigation expanded, financial ties between Claire's family and international financial crime organizations began to surface. From disguised investment funds in Europe to black money brokerage networks in South America. A colleague updated me. Links to financial cartels, laundering from drugs, smuggling. The scale quickly outgrew a single family, dragging in other individuals and organizations. Agencies had to coordinate across departments, FBI, DEA, Interpol, and extend the probe internationally. I got a call from my superior. "Noah, this is big. We're tracking Claire." My heart raced. Anticipation peaked, like waiting for a bomb to go off. I knew she couldn't hide forever. I realized the marriage between Paul and Claire had never been mere emotion or a simple moral lapse. It was the perfect legal tool for shielding, naming, and legitimizing the money flows. I sat alone in the kitchen, holding a cup of cold tea, and everything clicked into place. We met in college. Was that orchestrated? Marrying me, the son of a businessman, then moving to Paul when I became useless. Paul was just the outer shell. He signed the papers, but Claire and her family were the core operators. Her parents, people I had met a few times, polite but distant, now revealed as the masterminds. Each piece fit together like a complete dark picture. I gasped for breath, sweat beading, thrilled not from fear but from realizing I had lived beside a stranger. As everything came into focus, I understood that my ex-wife's family had no escape left. The scale and nature of the case had far exceeded any possibility of cover-up or negotiation. No lawyer could save them, no connection could intervene. I quietly closed the files in front of me, the copies I kept privately, fully aware that once the machinery of justice was fully engaged, their collapse was only a matter of time. No one could step in to salvage it. I turned off the light, lay down in bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Anticipation surged. I imagined the arrest, Claire in handcuffs, her arrogant face crumbling. But mixed with it was sadness. For my mother, for the shattered family. The game was ending, but at what cost? The weeks that followed passed in a strange state of suspension. My work at the DOJ continued to pull me in, with new cases and endless meetings, but my mind kept drifting back to Claire's case. I followed it through colleagues, brief, coded updates to avoid leaks. The investigation is progressing well, Noah. They're compiling evidence. I nodded without asking more, but every evening when I got home, I sat at the kitchen table staring out at New York City's neon lights flickering and wondered, when will the storm finally hit? That anticipation ran like an undercurrent of electricity beneath my skin, not fear, but waiting, like knowing a massive secret is about to explode. I ran more to burn off the tension, but every stride made me picture Claire fleeing. Hurried luggage, panicked eyes. She had once been my wife, shared my bed, laughed with me. Now she was the mastermind behind a criminal network. A mingled sadness washed over me. For my mother, for the years of deception, for the part of my life that had been lied to. Then the moment arrived. Once all the evidence had been compiled and legally validated, a coordinated federal arrest operation was approved. I got the news from a colleague early one morning while brewing coffee. They're moving in, Noah, a full-scale sweep. My heart pounded, the coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. The operation targeted the network run by Claire and her family. Not a single arrest, but a synchronized raid involving the FBI, DEA, and international agencies. I slumped into a chair, breathing heavily, anticipation at its peak. They had been tracking her for weeks, knowing her schedule, her secret calls with her parents. Claire was hiding in a villa near the Mexican border, trying to liquidate assets through final offshore accounts. I imagined the scene. Agents in black jackets, sidearms ready, surrounding the house under cover of night. The thrill made my hands shake. Was there resistance? Casualties? The arrests happened almost simultaneously at multiple locations. I read the internal report afterward. Claire and her parents were subdued while attempting to dissipate assets and prepare to flee the country. In New York, a SWAT team stormed the family's secret office, a high-rise disguised as a financial consulting firm. Her father, Richard, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a cold demeanor, was handcuffed at his desk amid piles of papers and computers frantically deleting data. Her mother, Evelyn, was arrested at JFK Airport, luggage stuffed with cash and fake documents. And Claire, she was captured at the border in a sleek black SUV trying to speed through a checkpoint. I pictured it. Sirens blaring, blinding headlights, agents shouting to stop before blocking the vehicle. She pulled over, stepped out with hands raised, face pale under the lights. Dozens of accounts were frozen instantly. Hundreds of millions of dollars locked, from Swiss banks to Cayman investment funds. Properties were sealed. Villas, luxury apartments, even a yacht, all seized. Shell companies were urgently dissolved, ending years of underground financial operations. I sat reading the report, heart racing. It was as dramatic as an action movie, but this was reality, the collapse I had been waiting for. The media and press exploded with coverage, describing it as one of the largest cross-border money laundering cases in years. I turned on the TV the next morning and the news was everywhere. International money laundering network dismantled, involving dozens of individuals and organizations. Reporters stood outside the federal courthouse detailing the scale. Money from drugs, arms smuggling, even political corruption cleaned through Claire's family system. It dragged in dozens of others, complicit lawyers to international partners, all swept into the vortex. I turned off the TV, sighed, but the anticipation lingered. Now came the trials. I knew they would drag on, but I would follow them, attend when necessary. Sadness returned for my mother for what might have been different, but I pushed it down, focused on work, and waited. The public trials opened and stretched over many months, involving multiple federal agencies. The Manhattan courtroom was packed, reporters, lawyers, the curious. I attended a few early sessions, sitting in the back row, observing. The judge, a middle-aged man with a stern voice, banged the gavel and it began. Prosecutors laid bare the entire money laundering structure, asset concealment, and ties to international financial crime organizations. Complex charts projected on screens, funds from Mexican cartels flowing through Claire's shell companies, then returning to the U.S. as real estate investments. Emails, meeting minutes, even secret recordings, all presented. Claire sat in the defendant's seat wearing gray prison garb, her once glossy hair disheveled, face gaunt. Her parents sat nearby, faces ashen. Each day, another layer of secrets was stripped away. Anticipation peaked as prosecutors called witnesses. A former employee testified, Claire directed everything, she decided every transfer. Throughout the proceedings, Claire's central role became indisputably clear. She wasn't just involved, she coordinated the money flows, directed the shell entity network, and made the strategic decisions. Her lawyers tried to paint her as a coerced bystander, a peripheral victim, but faced with airtight, consistent evidence, every defense argument quickly crumbled. I sat watching, heart pounding, drama at its height when an FBI agent took the stand. We tracked her for months, catching her in the act of fleeing. Claire bowed her head, tears falling, but not from remorse, only desperation. Her parents were similarly exposed, Richard as the ringleader, Evelyn handling the books. Each session, the courtroom fell deathly quiet, broken only by reporters' whispers. I went home exhausted but couldn't sleep, anticipating the end. The final verdict came after many months. The atmosphere was heavy. Everyone sat still, waiting. The judge read the sentence. Based on irrefutable evidence, the court sentences Claire Henderson to 25 years in federal prison. Her parents and numerous other defendants received corresponding long terms. Richard 20 years, Evelyn 15 years, others from 5 to 10 years. All assets of illicit origin were confiscated, villas, cars, accounts, everything gone. Related financial rights were revoked, completely closing any path back for her family. I attended the final session, witnessing the irredeemable fall of someone who had once stood at the peak of confidence and arrogance. Claire stood, face pale, eyes vacant. As Claire was escorted out of the courtroom, she glanced back at me for a brief moment. Her eyes held no power or control anymore, only emptiness and despair like a trapped animal. I met her gaze but didn't respond, didn't pause. Because for me, any explanations or resentment had become meaningless. She had once been my wife, had destroyed my life, but now she was just the past. I left the courthouse in silence, leaving behind a case fully closed, knowing that from this point the past could no longer turn back. Outside, New York's sky was golden with sunshine, a gentle breeze blowing like a new beginning. I drove home, heart lighter, but still carrying some emptiness. The thrill was over. Only fragile peace remained. After all that turmoil, I decided to step away from the media spotlight and the sensational cases. Reporters kept hounding me, calling relentlessly for interviews. But I turned them all down, turning off my phone, deleting emails, and narrowing my life down to essentials. I no longer wanted to live under false glamour or be defined by events that were now behind me. Instead, I chose quiet over power and confrontation. I resigned from the DOJ not out of disillusionment, but because I needed space to breathe. They understood, patting my shoulder. "Noah, you've done enough. Now rest." I moved to a small house in the suburbs of New York, near a peaceful lake where birdsong replaced blaring horns. Life became simple, waking early, brewing coffee, reading by the window, and taking long walks. No more sleepless nights over files, no more anxious waits for verdicts. Just me and the peace I had chosen for myself. I built a new, slower, intentional rhythm where each day passed free from the grip of hatred, conflict, or names from the past. I started learning to cook, simple things like toast with eggs or vegetable soup to fill my solitary evenings. I joined a local running club where people greeted each other with smiles and never pried into backgrounds. With every step on the forest trails, I felt my body grow stronger, my mind clearer. Names like Paul and Claire still lingered somewhere, but they had lost their power. They were distant ghosts now, unable to reach me. The painful memories that once weighed me down gradually receded. They didn't vanish completely. They still surged back on late nights when I lay awake thinking of my mother, the cold funeral, the double betrayal. But they no longer controlled my life. I learned to accept, not to forgive immediately, but to let them drift by like clouds. On that journey, I met Emma Collins, a gentle, calm woman. It happened at a small cafe by the lake where I often went to read. She walked in carrying an old novel and sat at the next table. We exchanged polite greetings, then talked about books, not work, not the past. Emma was an elementary school teacher with softly wavy brown hair, a warm smile, and respectful eyes. She wasn't curious about my history, didn't ask about the cases in the news, wasn't drawn to past power or status. Emma valued the man I was now, listening when I spoke about my runs, understanding my silences, and bringing back the sense of safety I had lost long ago. She didn't try to fix me. She simply stayed, sharing ordinary moments. Walks by the lake, cooking dinner together, lying under the stars. Our love grew naturally, quietly, without need for proof. It wasn't the storm it had been with Claire. No grand promises, no drama, just small gestures. Emma holding my hand on walks, me making soup for her when she was tired. We talked about the future, not grand plans but simple dreams, a little house, a garden, perhaps children. That love matured enough for marriage in a simple, lasting way. The wedding took place in a small park with only close friends and family. No five-star hotel, no elite guests, just us exchanging rings under an ancient tree and simple vows. I will be by your side not only on easy days but when life grows quiet and hard. When everything is abundant or when we have nothing but each other, I will still choose to hold your hand and keep going. I looked at Emma in her simple white dress and my heart pounded, not with fearful anticipation but with the thrill of happiness. A new life was beginning, and this time it was real. I didn't seek forgiveness from those who had hurt me, nor did I cling to resentment. For me, letting go was the only way to truly move forward. I didn't write to Paul in prison, didn't seek Claire for confrontation. They were the past. Paul with his belated remorse, Claire paying with her freedom. I chose not to think about them anymore, not to let hatred gnaw at me. Emma once said when I told her about my mother, "Letting go isn't forgetting, it's allowing yourself to live." And I did, pouring all my care into our little family. Once we visited my mother's grave together, standing quietly before the old stone where all loss and beginnings converged. It was an autumn afternoon. Golden leaves drifted down. A cool breeze swept through the cemetery. Emma held my hand, standing silently beside me, asking nothing. I looked at the gravestone engraved with her name, Eleanor Henderson. Memories flooded back. Her smiles, her tears, her passing from the shock of betrayal. I whispered, "Mom, I've found my own happiness now." Emma placed a bouquet of white flowers down, and we stood there listening to the wind. Looking back on the journey, I understood that not everyone who hurts you will recognize they're wrong. Paul regretted it, but too late. Claire perhaps never would. but justice and time always find a way to place everything where it belongs. Paul in prison, Claire stripped of freedom, and me truly free. I realized the greatest lesson wasn't in revenge or winning, but in having the courage to leave toxic relationships to protect yourself. I had once tried to save my marriage to Claire, tried to confront Paul, but it was futile. Walking away was the right choice, painful but necessary. From everything I had been through, I drew advice for myself and for anyone trapped in toxic relationships. Don't try to save people who don't want to change. They will drag you down, as Claire dragged Paul, as they dragged my mother. Have the courage to leave before it's too late, because peace isn't something granted. It's something you must choose for yourself. I repeated those words in my mind every day like a mantra. With Emma, I lived by them, cherishing without control, without deception. Life now was small moments. Lily giggling as I chased her, Emma whispering, "Good night, my love," before sleep. Anticipation remained, for life's surprises, but no longer dark. As the sunset fell over the cemetery, I stood beside Emma before my mother's grave, placed the white bouquet on the cold stone, then took her hand and walked away slowly. Behind us, the rows of headstones faded in the dying light. Ahead was a long, quiet road where the past no longer had the strength to hold me back. We walked on, hand in hand, the wind carrying the scent of autumn leaves. Emma asked if I was okay, voice gentle. I smiled. I'm better than ever. And the story closed in the peace I had chosen for myself.